evening, everybody, and chess enthusiasts. With us this evening is Jason Delpire, an experienced chess player and actually a DBRL staff member. And this is the third chess program we have held online. And once we get started, I'll put the links to the other two programs in the chat because you might be interested in viewing them as well if you were unable to attend in person. This evening is also being recorded and should be up on the YouTube channel for the library in about a week. If you have questions during the program, please type them in the chat, and Jason's going to try to address them as we go. And if he misses one, I'll just unmute and chime in real quick and let him know as we go along. But right now, I'm going to magically disappear so Jason can share his screen and all the good opening chess information that we need to know. So welcome and enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. Like Sarah said, my name is Jason Delpire. What I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about chess openings. I'm going to share my screen. I have this, I'm using this site called Lichess and using their option called a study. So we can look at the board and you can follow along. What I'm going to do is first, does everyone know chess notation? If you don't know chess notation, just put it in the chat that you don't. We can go over it really quickly. But I'm going to be verbalizing everything, so it should. Okay, so we don't have we have one. So essentially, I'm going to be using the name of the piece, so rook, knight, bishop, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook. And the board is set up in a grid pattern, starting with files, running from white to black, from white side of the board to black side of the board, all the way down. And they're given titles A, B. Let me get these out of here so I can follow. So this is the A file, right? This is the B file, the C file, the D file, and so forth, all the way to H. So then the other part of the designation of a square is the rank. So, and those are left to right. This is a big mess right now, I'm sorry, but it'll be easier. I'm just going to, they're listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, starting from white side of the board to black side of the board. And you can find the name of any square just by starting with the letter and then adding the number. So let me try to, oh, that's the one. Okay, so this is, yeah, this is square E4. This is square D4. I'm like messing up all this stuff. Okay, anyway, we're gonna move on. So what this is about is this program is about openings, basic ideas of just how to start a game and put yourself in the best position to play, to win. And I'm going to ask some questions here. So how do you start a chess game? Do you play a knight, or do you play maybe a pawn in front of the king, E4, or do you maybe play the pawn in front of the queen, play to D4? Or maybe the possibilities are just too much and you end up choosing a random move each time. Or maybe you've worked out a sequence that you try to play. Or maybe if you've started studying chess, you know some openings. Maybe you've played online, like if we play this game out right here, we can see that this opening right here is called the Queens Gambit. So each series of moves has a name. For almost every series of moves, they designate they give a name to a series of moves just to make it easier to understand when you're talking between chess players. So another question is, have you ever lost a game within like the first 15 moves? If so, this was probably because you violated one or more opening principle. The purpose of this program will be to instill some confidence and give some comfort to the newer player, to show that the opening is important, but it's not the only phase worth studying. Meaning if you play the opening poorly, your position can be worse and your task will be difficult. But it's usually not impossible to fight back and get to like an even game and still win. Like it's usually okay. Though it is possible to lose outright in the opening, and I do have some examples of that. And again, so before we get too deep, I do want to emphasize that the opening is not the time that you're really trying to win the game. What you're trying to do is you're just trying to get to what's called a playable middle game. And you're going to hear this a lot from me, probably from anything you read online, or you're talking to other chess players. It's just get to a playable middle game and you go from there. Now, saying that, you can certainly lose in the opening. If you play poorly, you can certainly lose. I've lost in the opening. I've won in the opening. But I know it sounds strange, but unless your opponent blunders, essentially like gives you material, you're really not trying to win the game there. So one thing to note, that the opening phase is different for both sides, for white and black, because by virtue of the first move, white has a slight advantage. And what black is trying to do is what's called equalize and get to a position that first move advantage has been negated. And it's most openings that you see that you may know or hear about, or things that we will talk about. If you use a computer, like this uses a Stockfish version, it'll give like a numerical evaluation, which we're not going to worry about that in this program, but you can kind of tell who's winning or who has an advantage. And you'll find that even in Grandmaster games, white still has an advantage, even out of the opening, usually, not always, usually. So the opening gets a lot of attention, from YouTube videos to books, and many amateurs, myself included, have been distracted by the excitement of trying a new opening, thinking that it's the one to make you master. Like, this is the one I need to know. But really, maybe you've lost a quick game and you thought it had to be the opening. It certainly wasn't how I played. It was the opening that's no good. So then you switch another opening, and that happens a lot. But we really need to not think of it as so critically important. The standard is usually right around when you get to a rating 2000, if you've played online, or maybe you've played over the board in a USCF tournament. Really right around 2000, you start to need some specific opening knowledge. Really until that point, just basic opening principles will get to you to that playable middle game. Yes, sometimes you can get caught in a trap or you make a blunder. It's okay. We all lose games. Even Magnus Carlsen has lost games. It happens. All right, so that was kind of my opening sales pitch to the program. The game of chess is more or less divided into 3 phases, called the opening, the middle game, and the end game. It's important to remember that these phases are not distinct and clearly defined like quarters in a football game. Each phase leads into the next, and sometimes you can even go directly from the opening right into the end game. This will happen when the queens are traded and other pieces are traded pretty quickly. And some openings do that, and that's okay. You can't like stop the game and say, "Hey, we need a middle game." That's not necessary. And if you're wondering like how long does the opening last, it's usually about 12 to 15 moves. By that time, some of the goals of the opening should have occurred. Some of the opening, and these are going to list some things here, and these are kind of something you could maybe take note of, that these are your goals from the opening. And note that none of these say win material. So it's good to remember that. So the first thing to do when you're thinking about the goals of the opening are develop your pieces. You want to develop your pieces safely. So put them in places where they're not immediately attacked or in danger of being captured. You want to try to castle early. You want to get your king to safety. You want to try not to make too many pawn moves, because remember that pawn moves are not development. They aid in development, but they are not development in itself. You want to try to avoid bringing your queen out too early. The reason is that your opponent can develop their own pieces while attacking your queen, and then you just have to move your queen again, and then you lose time. You waste moves. We'll talk about time later on. You also don't want to move the same piece twice unless you have a real good reason. Again, you waste time. While you're moving your piece, that same piece again and again, your opponent can be taking advantage of that and developing all of their pieces. You want to develop towards the center. And lastly, you want to clear the back rank for your rooks to be able to protect each other. And we're going to talk about these a little bit more in a bit. Another little list that I think rewords what I just said in a different way was by a grandmaster and a really highly respected author, Grandmaster Ludwig Pachmann. And in his book, Modern Chess Strategy, he offers the following 4 principles of opening play. I think they're just a different way of putting what I said. So place the pieces without loss of time, where they can develop their greatest power. Do not move a piece that is already developed unless you have a strong reason for doing so. Avoid putting pieces on squares where they can be driven off by moves that also contribute to the development of enemy pieces and pawns. And lastly, play pawn moves in the opening, or pawn moves in the opening serve only as an aid to development of your pieces and as a means for fighting for the center, and keep such moves therefore to a minimum. And if you can achieve those while hindering your opponent, you're usually doing well. Potentially, if your opponent is deficient in one of those areas, you may even have an advantage, okay? So achieving the goals that we just listed can be guided by 5 principles. These 5 basic elements are material, time, space, pawn structure, and king safety. I'm going to explain each of those a little bit more and show some examples for those. So the first thing I want to mention is time. And I mentioned that earlier, or I alluded to it earlier. And it says, what is time in chess? And this is an easily misunderstood and potentially undervalued concept by newer players. Time is best evaluated by comparing your position to the opponent's position. Have you been efficient with your development? Or have you moved the same piece multiple times trying to win a pawn or fix its positioning because you played it to a poor square earlier in the game? Or maybe you developed a piece where it could be immediately attacked and you had to move it to safety. So ideally you want, like I said before, ideally you want to move each piece only once in the opening. You want to place it on its best square the first time. And again, moving pawns is not development. It only aids in development. Pawn moves may gain space. We'll talk about space later. And they allow you to complete development, but that is not development in itself. So, and in fact, too many pawn moves will create open diagonals or files that can be used by your opponent. And if you've ever seen, like this is the Queens Gambit, there are other gambits like the King's Gambit, the Banco Gambit, Smith-Morra Gambit, there's a bunch. Most of those gambits, except for the Banco Gambit, offer material for time. What they offer is your opponent captures some of your material, and because they take a move to capture that material, you use that time to develop your pieces and hopefully gain an overwhelming advantage. So I have an opening series of moves I want to show you that, moving the whole screen, which is not what I wanted to do. Okay, so this is called, I'm going to pronounce this wrongly, but it's okay. This is called the Alekine's defense. This is the way most English speakers will say it. Sorry for moving the screen like that. So it starts off, I'm gonna start it over again, sorry. So it starts off with e4, pawn moved e4, and the signifying move here is knight to f6. And what does this do? This attacks the pawn. So if white doesn't want to lose the pawn, they have to do a couple things. They could try to gambit the pawn, or they can protect the pawn, or the final option, which is used or is wanted in this opening, is for white to push the pawn, thereby attacking the knight. Black moves the knight out of harm. White takes the opportunity to move another pawn. And now we can see that what white has gained is open lines for their pieces, specifically their bishops, and the queen is open. And now this knight is moved multiple times, right? Here, black takes the opportunity to kind of fight against this pawn. White again uses another pawn, making the knight move again. And I'm going to show you one of the more aggressive lines in this opening. This is the 4 pawns attack. Yeah. So here we see this sort of balance between space and development. We're going to go forward a little bit to the end of the line. But here we see in how many moves, 11 moves, each side has achieved their opening goals. And we have a difference here in outlook of the opening. We see that white has used his pawns to gain space, and what black has done is allowed white to do this. And what will happen in the future is black will have to fight against these pawns and show that these are too far advanced and thereby weak. So that's an example of one opening where time is important, and it's sort of a balance between the space gaining of the pawns and the mobility of the pieces. Okay. So next we're going to talk about pawn structure. Did anyone have any questions about time, or maybe about that opening, or we're going to move on to pawn structure next. So pawn structure, the idea of pawn structure can be a difficult concept. And the reason is there are things to consider like pawn islands, double pawns, pawn majorities, backward pawns, open and half open files. Also to consider in pawn structure is the potential of a good versus bad bishop. I understand that this is too much information, but it's just how I am. Remember that pawns can't move backwards. So each decision to move a pawn must have a good cause. And some openings that really highlight the use of pawn structure would be some lines in the Nimzo Engine and in the Carol Khan. There is, I have a couple here. It's going to move again. All right, so here is an opening called the Nimzo Engine. This is an opening that starts with 1d4. And again, black uses knight to f6 as their first move. Now you see with each of these moves, they're in some way dealing with the center and trying to affect control, right? Like I'm gonna put a whole bunch of, arrows there again to make it nice and confusing. Anyway, so this is the key move in the Nimzo Engine. Is what happens is black develops this bishop and pinning the knight to the king. We're going to continue some moves here. This is a standard. So what happened here is eventually white was kind of sick of black having the bishop there. So he attacks the pawn, or attacks the bishop with the pawn. And what happened here is now we have a thing called double pawns. These two pawns are on the same file. So you have double pawns on a file. And in an opening like this, the idea is that the knights are going to be better for black, and that one of these pawns will be weak and can be attacked in the future. So this is, if we consider black's pawn structure is still very good. There are no double pawns. There's really no backward pawns. I'll talk about that in the future also. But I want to show the other opening a little bit quick. Find it. So this is an opening called the Carol Khan. And what happens is with this one is there's a thing called an isolated pawn. So I'm just going to go through here really quickly. And so here, this pawn is isolated because it doesn't have any pawns to protect it, right? Like no pawns can protect this pawn. So this is an isolated pawn. This brings up a good point. This is a good example here of something we mentioned earlier, is pawn islands. And a pawn island is like when you start your game and you have all 8 pawns side by side, you have one connected, all your pawns are connected. You would consider having one pawn island. These pawns are separated. So black has 2 pawn islands. White has 3 pawn islands along with the isolated pawn. So I have a question or a comment from Tom. It says black's defense moves assume they recognize white's opening and know the best defense for it. Yes and no. The issue there is that the opening is really a personal choice where you're trying to get to a position that you're comfortable with. So for example, when I play, I like open lines. I like being able to attack my opponent pretty early in the opening, pretty early in the game. So I try to trade some pawns and open up the game, right? Like this is an opening that I would play as white because this is it's an isolated pawn, and it can be a weakness if black can gang up on it and win it, and then I'll just beat down the pawn. Or I can use this as a wedge to push it into black's position and disrupt the pieces and their pawn structure. So really, when we're talking about black's defensive moves, as much as you're trying to achieve your own goals, you're also trying to minimize your opponent's goals. So it's kind of like a dance. You don't really, it's pretty rare that you do anything without checking what your opponent is doing, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers somewhat of your question. So next we're going to go to material. Material is important, of course, but being greedy can cause you some problems. This kind of pairs well with the concept of time. You know, taking time to grab a wayward pawn may sound like a good idea, and you may have your extra pawn, but if it wastes a lot of time, or if your pieces are not coordinated and easy to attack, or maybe you have neglected the safety of your king, that can lead to some problems for you. So I have this. Just gonna move the screen again. So here we go. This is a common trap. Not really a trap. It's just something that has happened a number of times, and we all kind of fall into, I guess we'll call it a trap. We fall into this as beginners. We've all done it in some level. I've won a game similar to this in an over-the-board game many years ago. I'm not proud of it. Well, I must be somewhat proud of it because I'm telling it now. But I'm going to go through it. So e4, e5, knight to f3, d6. So what happened here is white developed their knight, attacking this pawn, and black has used the move d6 to protect the pawn. White develops their bishop to a good square, bishop to c4. We want to note that we're looking at this square with this bishop. And remember that this is a weak square because the only thing that's protecting this pawn is the king. And black decides they develop a piece and pin the knight to the queen. It's a pin because if you're unfamiliar with that term, if the knight moves, the piece behind it can be taken. So it's kind of, it's pinned to the queen, to the more powerful piece behind it. White develops a knight. So now we can look at time here also. This is a good example of time. White has 3 pieces to black's 1 piece developed so far. And here's this is kind of a wasted move, don't you think? H6 doesn't develop any pieces. It doesn't really threaten any of white's pieces, developed pieces. So does anyone have, I suppose you can see probably see the next move, but has anyone seen this before? I'm sure, I know one of you have. But so the next move here is knight takes e5. And you're thinking, wait a second. We talked about, yeah, I knew you'd know that. So you wait a second, can't this bishop take this queen? And you are correct. But like we talked about earlier, some wasted time has caused black some problems. And now white is just sacrificing a queen. So now that's check, and black has to move. It only has one square to go to, which is e7. And white plays knight to d5, and that's checkmate. So what happened here is we see a good example of white developing, using good developing moves, where black has made some errors and a very bad one with wasting time with pawn to h6. And I think I'm going to go to another line, and if we just kind of go through this again to this point, so this pawn to d6, it does something. It's not. This is not a bad move. It defends the pawn. It defends this pawn on e5. However, I want to show this opening, which in my opinion sounds funny. I don't play it myself always, but I think this is one of the best openings, and it's the best opening for a beginner to play. Yeah, d6 beats f6, absolutely. And we're gonna look at that also. How about we look at that right now, actually? Did I not do that? Yeah, this one. So this is what was. So d6 is better than f6, yes, and we're going to show that right now. So e4, e5, knight to f3, attacking this pawn, right? So we know white is using good opening principles of developing and looking towards the center. And black makes another error. They're protecting this pawn. But now what happens? Does anyone know what happens after this move? And if you if you comment, you can make it to everyone, just so everyone can see, and you can.
Actually, they don't have that choice.
Oh, they don't have that. Sorry. So I will say, yeah, okay, that's fine. So the move here is knight takes e5. If black decides that they want to be greedy, they're going to take f takes e5, and then this very annoying and destructive move, queen to h5 check. Now, I know this sort of goes against some of the things I was talking about earlier, but this is a special case. This is you're going to win some material and probably the game very soon case. So there's really only one sensible move, and that is g6, and then queen to e5 check. And really whatever black does here, even queen e7, white can take the rook and has now won some material. They won a pawn and a rook for a knight. And yeah, black is attacking the c4 pawn, but it's not going to overcome that. Okay, so that's the material situation also. So that was a good, kind of a good sideline there. Next, we're going to talk about king safety, and that's something we just kind of saw here. Is black's errors caused some weakness in king safety, and because the power of the check allowed white to win some material. So really, when it talks about king safety, it's simply how much danger are you allowing yourself or your opponent while you're achieving, or how much danger are you or your opponent allowing while trying to achieve your goals. It is, and this is a good time to reiterate, your opponent is also trying to achieve their own goals, and it is good to remember that and not to play one-sided chess. Your opponent will respond to your moves ideally, and you should respond to theirs. So castling early in the game is a good goal. Sometimes we delay castling because we want to keep our opponent guessing to which side our king will end up, but that's kind of a dangerous game. Keeping your king in the center of the board can lead to your opponent starting an attack before you're ready to deflect it. Something to remember in king safety is were you forced, or did you willingly move pawns in front of your castled king? After your king is castled, you generally don't want to move pawns in front of the king because it creates weaknesses. And you should always, again, I'm going to reiterate this, you should always remember the safety of your king and the safety of your opponent's king. And I have an opening that talks about, so this one is the danger of not castling early, and kind of not castling early will also show king safety. So this is, again, this is an opening called the Carol Khan. We see white playing this very sensible double pawn opening. And black now attacks this pawn. Very classical response. White is defending this pawn while developing a piece. Black takes. White recaptures. Black develops a piece and attacks this knight, kind of forcing white to either take this knight or move their own knight again. Here, white sets kind of a trap by moving the queen. So black attacks the pawn again. White takes. Now this is interesting that white is attacking the knight twice. However, they're also offering a queen trade. Black makes a probably less than good move, we'll say, by not really dealing with the issue at hand, that there is a piece that's attacked twice. The center is pretty open. There are some pawns moved from here, right? This is all kind of open. And even though this is a check, it's pretty easily deflected by just playing bishop to d2, blocking the check. So now black takes the pawn. And now we have a pretty nice combination, starting with this castling queenside. And now black takes the knight, again, neglecting development, being greedy, and with the king in the center. Here's another queen sacrifice. And I'm going to give you a couple seconds to see if we can see the next move after king takes h8. Do we know what the next move is? Yeah, there's a bishop check. So we play bishop to g5, which is double check. This pawn or this rook and this bishop are both attacking the king, and now it's going to be checkmate either way. Black moves. The game itself went king c7, bishop d8 is the move. Doesn't say the game, but I thought it was a Steinitz game, by the way. Yeah, so that's checkmate. That's another instance of being greedy and neglecting your king. They all work together. Chess is like that. You can't just focus on one aspect. Okay. Next thing I'd like to talk about is is space. And this one is, it's kind of tough to, space can be good and can be bad. We'll say that. So this one is a kind of a double-edged thing to think about in the opening. And like, what is space? Space is controlling squares in your opponent's territory. And that's whether it's with pawns or with pieces, really. And why would you want space? Simply the mobility of your opponent's pieces will be hindered and your pieces will have more freedom to move. And pieces generally function better in space when they have freedom to move. Except for the knights, they're special. They don't always need an open board. In fact, they're better in positions that aren't open. So something I wanted to show, talking about the center. There we go. Sorry. So this is center control versus center occupation. And this might be a good time to just make sure everyone knows that when we talk about the center, we're talking about these 4 squares. We're talking about D4, D5, E4, and E5. Though I would also argue that you would want to, at least in some ways, extend the center, the extended center, to consider these squares also. When you think about how pieces move and have influence on the board, you really want to talk about that whole area. So here we have an issue. We have a situation where white has, they don't have 4 knights, but it's just, we're showing it, right? 4 knights occupying the center. They're occupying the center. But who has control of the center? I mean, if we look at where the knights are controlling, let's not put arrows actually. I should have done that. The knights are controlling all of these squares, right? A lot of squares around the center, but none are actually controlling the center. So, I mean, I can just put a bunch of, all of those squares are controlled or attacked by a knight, right? It's just ridiculous. But none of those are really in the center. But the bishops control the center. They're controlling the center. There we go. So that's an example of control versus occupy. It's good to remember that just because you occupy the center doesn't mean you control it. Okay. And again, we can look at this. We can look at another good example. If we look back at that Alekhine defense game, that was a situation of having center control and space and that balance between it. Here's another situation called the Peart's defense, where white opens up with E4, black plays D6, white again plays E4, or D4, sorry. Knight plays, or black plays knight F6. White develops a piece. And here, we're just going to continue through here. So now if we look at the setups here, and we look how quickly each side did this in 7 moves. In 7 moves, white castled and black managed to castle. I mean, that's just that's a good example of castling quickly. All of these moves made sense. This is not a situation where black made really any mistakes. It's just a different style of play. White is taking what black offered, and that was control and occupation of the center. And what black will do in the future is try to attack the center and make it weak, because, like we mentioned, pawns can't move backwards. So if you can, once these pawns have moved, what you're trying to do is then, right, except for allowing white to play e5. Yeah, if white can play e5, black can have some problems. So this is actually the next move is black takes the opportunity to play e5 immediately. So, I mean, that's an option, yes. So if you play the game of allowing your opponent to take too much space, they may just run you right over. So this is this can be a very, what's called double-edged opening, where black allows white to have a lot of space. And then the whole idea is to attack it later on in the future after the kings are safe. And so this is a good time to mention this, is that it's really important to remember that chess is about imbalances. And a great book on imbalances is How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman. There are many types of imbalances in chess. The 5 opening principles can really be imbalances. Whether you have taken material for time, or pawn structure for space, or maybe you've taken space, or you've allowed, doubled pawns, and for that you've taken piece mobility. And there's a funny situation here. I just want to show this quickly. There's a thing called the ideal setup. And this is what would happen if white just could make all of the moves that they would essentially want. They've gotten their pawns to the center, they've castled, the rooks are connected. Remember, that's the last thing that Grandmaster Bachmann had mentioned, connecting the rooks. This is a situation about connecting the rooks. The knights are developed to the center. I'm all about highlighting squares today. So here we see a situation where white has absolute control of the center, and this would be the ideal if black were to make time-wasting moves. This is a situation where white would have a distinct advantage if black did not try to hinder white in any real way. So going back, the 5 principles can be imbalanced. Sacrificing time to gain material, sacrificing material for time. Even the imbalances of piece imbalances are things to remember in the opening. If you trade a knight for a bishop, you give your opponent what's called the bishop pair. And in order to take advantage of that, your opponent will probably want to open up the position, trade some pawns to give those bishops diagonals to attack. So that's something you have to think about in the opening. Sometimes you sacrifice king safety by pushing pawns. That's something you have to think about. It's like, say you play the King's Gambit. That's something to think about. So some final tips here. When you're ready to start learning openings, be wary of trappy openings. If a grandmaster plays it in an over-the-board classical game, it's usually good. If you see them play it online in like a 1-minute game or quicker, it's probably not good. It's probably for surprise value. So I'm going to go through some very common openings, and they're kind of like an example of one of the lines in these openings. This is an opening called the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish opening. Yeah, gambits can be fun. But this is arguably, in my opinion, the best opening, because it follows all of the classic laws of chess, the rules and principles of chess. So we're going to go e4, e5, knight to f3, white develops a knight, attacking this pawn, and black responds by developing a knight, defending the pawn. There is a way to play knight to f6 in this position where black, instead of defending this pawn, attacks white's pawn. This is called the Petrov defense. It's viable, but again, it's a pretty high level opening that probably not for beginners. But oops, so we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to knight c6. Black develops a bishop, attacking this knight, which is then undermining the defense of this pawn. Because if black were to allow white to take this bishop, this pawn would be unguarded, right? And there is an opening. There's an opening where black allows this. But what we're going to do here is now black is what's called putting the question to the bishop. It's the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to capture the knight, or are you going to move away? In this example, white moves away, and black develops a piece. There is a situation where, I mean, you can still take the knight here and take the pawn, but we're not going to go over that. Actually, you can't take the pawn. White castles. Black develops a bishop. Now white protects this pawn because it was unguarded, right? Now black makes sure that white can't take this knight. Finally, black double defends this pawn, which would allow this knight to move in the future without fear of that pawn being captured. This pawn to c3 is really is preparing a move d4. And the reason that this happens is white is ready to open the center because black hasn't castled yet. So it's a threat. It's a threat to take control of the center. And if black wastes any more time, it could be a problem. So of course, black castles. This is just to deny black the ability to put the bishop here and pin the knight. So that's a preventative move you take some time, it's a useful move, so it's not really a wasted move, right? So this is a dual purpose move of attacking this bishop and also vacating the c6 square to allow black to move this and to have some more control over the center. Black removes, or white moves the bishop, and here we see pawn c5, and white plays pawn to d4. We're going to stop there. Just kind of shows how all of the principles were used in this opening. White still has a slight advantage. I mean, it's only 11 moves into the game. So, but that's a very common opening. And if we were to look at this has been played thousands of times. This is just the database on Lichess, and it's been played 5,000 times. So the next opening I want to look at pretty quickly is a thing called the Queens Gambit. Queens Gambit declined. Yeah, the poor knight. Knight on the rim. If you know that saying, knight on the rim is grim, or dim, or whatever. So this is the Queen's Gambit declined. So this is a d4 opening. We've mostly looked at e4 openings, except for that Nimzo Engine opening. So d4, D5. Black mirrors white's choice. Here, this is called a gambit because if black wanted to, they could take this pawn and it's not immediately able to be recaptured. And white would use it to, if black were to take this pawn, white would use it as an opportunity to play E4 and take more space. But Queen's Gambit accepted is not as common as the declined version. It's not bad, but it's just not as popular. So here we see the declined. There is, I know this sounds, this may look like it's counter to what we're saying. There is an opening where black moves the bishop to F5 called Baltic defense. There are other options here. You can, besides D6, you can also play knight F6, you could play C6, you could play knight F6, I mean, or knight C6, sorry. There's a lot of options so soon in the game, but E6 is the move, knight C3, knight F6. And then here, white takes the opportunity to trade what's called a flank pawn for a center pawn. And if we look here, we're just going to go all the way to the end. So this is a line in the Queen's Gambit declined. All of the pieces are developed except for black's queen. Otherwise, their rooks would be connected. But here we see, this is a good example of another imbalance. If we look at this board, the queen side versus king side pawns, this is sometimes something you have to think about in the opening too. So all of the pawns, this D file is the queen file, and everything to from A to D is the queen side. I hope this is making sense. And white has 2 or 3 pawns. 3 pawns on the queen side, to black's 4 pawns. And on the king side, where the king starts, and from E to H, white has 4 pawns and black has 3 pawns. So there's that imbalance of pawns on each side of the board. And that's something that you will should keep an eye on. This is another good example of a situation where you can look at how to play after the opening. You can look at how the pawns are pointed. So black's pawns are pointed this way. Black is going to want to play where their pieces are located. The pawn imbalance favors which side. Whoever can make use of it. It's not an advantage necessarily. It's an imbalance. That's a really good question. A good thing to bring up. An imbalance is not always an advantage. It's just an imbalance. It's it's how you use it. It's a material is equal, but the pawn structures are imbalanced. Yeah, that's a good thing to. That's a difficult question to answer in this scenario. It's how you continue from this position. I want one more opening that I want to look at. This is another very common opening. It's kind of a high level opening. We're going to kind of move through it pretty quickly because we're almost out of time. But this is called the Sicilian defense. It's a very common opening. E4 is the most common first move for white. C5 is probably the most common response. And this is the Sicilian defense. White continues. Yeah. White continues with knight to F3. Black plays D6. White plays D4. Some people, and in some ways, I agree with this idea that the move D4 by white is a slight mistake because you're trading a flank pawn for a center pawn. but it's an imbalance, and in chess you give and you take, and it's whoever can take the most for what they've given usually wins. So the pawns are traded. Knight is now centralized. Black develops and attacks this pawn. White develops and protects it. And black moves another pawn, allowing the bishop to be developed. Black develops a bishop. Black develops their bishop. There's this is called the Yugoslav attack. It's highly theoretical and double-edged, but so I'm just going to move. Here we have what's called opposite side castling. Black is castled on the king side, white is castled on the queen side. And now the idea is white is going to push these pawns. There was a famous quote by Bobby Fischer, sack, sack, mate. Essentially in this opening, white is just, you're trying to checkmate your opponent. I mean, that's it. There's no, you're going to throw everything at your opponent's king. So, and because of the opposite side castling, these pawns are free to move, and these pawns are free to move. So it's a very aggressive opening. I think that's about all I have. I mean, I can go over some other things really quickly, but if you notice, if you're on this site called Late Chess, I created an account just for when we do chess programming, and you can look at this. You can look at this study if you search for DBRL chess. And I know Sarah got on here. I'm just going to mention a few things really quickly. Some books in our catalog that I think are really interesting for beginning opening information. One of the best titles I've seen for new players is a book called Basic Chess Openings for Kids. It's by Charles Hurtan. It's an ebook. How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman. Understanding the Chess Openings by Sam Collins. Winning Chess Openings by Yasser Seirawan. Chess for Everyone by Al Lawrence. And then a little bit more advanced is a book series by Karsten Hansen. It's called Catastrophes and Tactics in the Chess Openings, and we have all of those in ebook. We have the Keep It Simple books by Christoph Sielecki. He does YouTube videos under the name Chess Explained. Lastly, one thing I really want to mention is a resource that we have on our website called BrainFuse. It's on the DBRL site. It's a chess tutor that is available for free. You just need a library card. That's available Monday through Thursday from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Central Time. Also, I have another way to learn is by playing people. And to that end, I created a free chess club that meets on Thursdays. If you need any more information on that, I'm going to put the email address, and you can send me an email and I will give you more information. At that email address, I will respond and tell you more information about Chess Club or any other chess stuff. So thanks for sitting through that. If you have any questions, we're going to be here for a little while after the recording.
Yeah, we will. Thank you so much, Jason. And I'll put the link for BrainFuse in the chat as well. BrainFuse, it's going to say free online tutoring and job help, so it's going to throw you off a little bit. But believe it or not, there is the free, got a person at the other end help for chess. So that's very exciting. And it was under the Help Now, I think, right? Under the adult part.
Yeah, I can.
Not the
I can
kid part, the
actually
adult part.
could actually just go to it, right?
Yeah, so that was very exciting. Someone had let us know that, and it's just
So yeah,
great.
research and learn, brain fuse. And if we scroll down, get started with Help Now. It'll lead you to the screen, and in this expert help, the featured service, chess tutoring, connect with a tutor to sharpen your cognitive skills. Yeah, you just follow that, and you can. Yeah, it'll tell you the times also. You know, it's unavailable on the 21st, but yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Jason. As I said before, this is part 3, so to speak. There are going to be 3 videos on our YouTube channel about chess, and the other 2 are up already, and this one should be up next week. So thank you guys so much for coming this evening, and we hope you had a great time.
Thank you.